Jimmy, would you like to provide some introductory remarks, please?
Sure. Welcome, everybody.
Recording in progress.
I am the co-founder or one of the co-founders of Transit Choices and its president. I want to emphasize how important it is to have you all as an audience, that you're supporting our advocacy by participating and listening to these meetings, because that enables us to attract the key decision makers in the transit arena to come to these meetings and present to the public what they're doing, and for them to get feedback from you all. So your participation it results in supporting better public transit in Baltimore. So thank you all for participating. We have 3 interesting presentations today. One of them from the Fund of Educational Excellence and Baltimoreans for Educational Excellence. I think is very interesting because it's an intersection of 2 of Governor Moore's key objectives, which is to improve both public transportation and education. Their presentations will show how these 2 issues intersect, and I think they're very interesting. But Robin, I'll let you go ahead and introduce each of the speakers. I just want to thank you all for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jimmy. We are going to kick off our meeting this morning with a presentation that is titled "Not in Service, a Year and a Half Later, Transit Equity for City School Students." And we actually have a joint presentation by Ruth Farfel, Kwane, Wyatt, and Domeika. I have made each of you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen and also speak to our group. We're delighted to have you join us today. At the conclusion of each of the presentations, we will open the floor to our meeting participants for questions, comments, and feedback. So welcome.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you all for letting us be here. It's great to be here and give this talk today. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We have a presentation. So like Robin said, I'm with the Fund for Educational Excellence, but I'm also with Baltimoreans for Educational Equity, along with Kwane, Wyatt, and Domeika. And we're going to talk today a little bit about our partnership, some stories about student transit, and updates on our recommendations from our report that we put out. And I will pass it to Lee to introduce herself and talk a little bit about B.
Cool. Hey, everyone. Good morning. Yeah, I'm Domeika. And B, or Baltimoreans for Educational Equity, like Ruth said, is a group of teachers, former teachers, family, students, really anyone who's interested in supporting the advancement of Baltimore City students. We're working collaboratively around educational equity, and right now our key priorities lie in transit equity and teacher retention. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means specifically in a bit, but I should know this, but I think we've been an organizing group for a few years now, and are really looking to build up our membership base. And we'll also talk a little bit at the end too, if any of you are interested in getting involved. But I'll just conclude by saying a lot of our work, we try and focus on the district and city level specifically, but sometimes it extends to the state depending upon what's going on and how legislation would impact Baltimore City students.
Thanks, Lee. So I want to talk a little bit about my organization, the Fund for Educational Excellence. So we're an education nonprofit in Baltimore. We've been around since the 80s, and we do a wide spectrum of things with the district, everything from fundraising to some family engagement programs. But a lot of what we do is just honestly support the district whether that's resource development or thinking through different solutions. And one of the reasons we're here today is because we put out reports every year that bring up challenging issues or things that people are talking about over and over, that we want to sort of do a deep dive in, figure out what's happening, what is the context for this issue, and provide recommendations to improve.
So to give you all a sense of how we as B work with the fund, as Ruth mentioned, we do a lot together just because the issues that we focus on have a lot of intersection. And so in 2021, we worked heavily together on the report that came out through the Fund for Educational Excellence, and the title of this presentation, Not in Service, to serve students. I'm sure some of you have either seen that or have been able to read it. If not, we can throw a link in the chat later. Highly recommend you check it out. But through this partnership, there's as you can see, a bulleted list of things we've been able to do as it relates to transit equity and Baltimore City students writ large. So just to name a few, we were able to support and host a city council hearing on student transit. We pushed for legislation that resulted in some changes for students, specifically around a physical one-card pass to use on the Charm Pass app. Back in almost a year ago, so June of last year, we co-hosted the Education Candidates Gubernatorial Forum. And oh, sorry, was someone chiming in? Okay, my bad. And then we, contributed to the governor's transition plan. And most recently, we threw down support for HB 491 or SB 465, which was around the Regional Transit Advisory Board. I don't believe that bill went anywhere this legislative session, but it's something we're definitely in support of and are looking forward to seeing how our support can grow next legislative session. I think that's it. Next slide.
I'm going to pass it to Wyatt, who's going to talk a little bit about some stories, and then we'll show some videos.
All right, great. So my name is Wyatt, Program Director at the Fund. I work closely with Ruth and was one of the co-authors of the report that we released in June of 2021. And one of the major things we try to do with the reports, no matter what the topic is, uplift the voice of those who are the subjects of the report. In this case, obviously, it was students who catch public transit. So in addition to the actual report, this time around, we wanted to create an audio visual aspect where students can tell the stories from their own perspectives. So right now we're going to take a look at a couple of those stories. Amani is one of the students who we talked to in the report, and then Naeem actually was someone who we connected with afterwards. And I'll let them tell their story through the videos.
Thanks, Kwane.
Ruth, I think when you share, it's a little button at the bottom that optimizes video.
Say it one more time.
I think when we play video, there's a button at the bottom when you share it that optimizes the video so the audio works. It's kind of weird.
Oh.
So you have to reshare, I think.
Okay. I just want to think for a second.
Mhm.
Is that okay? No.
We just can't hear it, Ruth.
Oh.
Yeah, it's
There's
like
there's no audio.
if you click share screen, Ruth,
Yeah.
and then you on the bottom left it says sound and optimize for video clip. I can try to do it if you can't find it though.
Let me just try it one more time. Oh.
My name is Naeem Adams. I'm 16. I'm a sophomore at Edmondson Western High School. And the meaning behind my name basically like mean happiness. I always lived by my name since like day one. Like going to Cherry Hill, it was really different. It's like, you know, you live in a whole different environment, even though you ain't gonna always be in the city. So it's like Cherry Hill is his own thing. Well, of course, violence occurs too. You know, when youth, they walking home, they often get shot. When they walking out of school, they get stabbed, they get jumped. No child should be bothered walking to school. I don't really like take like a school bus. I take a city bus. It takes me an hour or hour and a half because I gotta go over to Evanston Village. Mind you, I don't have service on my phone, so I often had to memorize what time it comes. But it often comes delayed, it often comes late. It just comes when it want to. And I don't feel like standing out here. Even though I don't feel like standing out here, I ain't got nowhere else to go. Because this is the only route I can take to school. I mean, when I get on the bus, most of the time it be packed. You know, people arguing on the phone, people bickering. I often sit by myself because my main focus is going to school. If I wake up super duper early, I get there by at least 8:15. Like when 8:15 starts, that's when class starts. Like I could be a couple minutes late, they'll probably let me slide. But it's like if I make it 10 to 20 minutes late or more, I'll be marked absent or tardy. I mean, can you really grade me off me being tardy? And I got a lot of people that care for me, that really want me to go to school every day and do the best I can, because nobody don't want to see a dropout. I mean, I know I'm not the only one that dealing with this. Trust me. There's a lot of people, because not everybody got cars. Not everybody got some type of transportation. Not everybody can afford these things. But I just feel like the transportation system could do better. I do it every day because it's in me, and I'm never made to give up on anything. And like I gotta get through the worst times just to get the best things I want. It's never gonna be easy, but I can make it happen. Trust, believe.
I'll quickly share next one.
All right. And so the second student was a recent graduate at the time. She's a student now at Micah, so she's doing good despite some of her challenges of getting to school.
My name is Imani Humphrey-Storrs. I'm 18 years old, and I attended Western High School. I live in the Belvedere Trincuppen Park neighborhood. I've lived here my entire life. My school by drive is probably 15, maybe 25 minutes with really rough traffic, but I know via transit, it's a lot rougher. The bus wait alone can be an hour, and the bus ride is 40 minutes. That's on a very good day. My personal commute, obviously waking up early, grabbing something to eat, and then having to walk to the first bus stop. I know if I got the notification that I was running late, I take the alternate route, which meant that I had to take a transfer bus, which means I did have to get up earlier in case that second bus didn't come, because if it didn't, then I had to walk the rest of the way to school. If you miss that bus, that's the problem, especially if they're running behind schedule or the buses are really packed, or even worse, bad weather. Then yeah, the wait is going to be significantly longer, which is inconvenient if you're relying on public transportation. When it came to the buses, which pull up like right in front of the school, the principal had a really strict like no late policy. But once they realized, all right, you have maybe about 130 to about 200 kids coming in late, at some point they couldn't just continue to mark everyone late. So they had to make a new policy so you would hear on the intercom, please excuse any students walking in for the next 5 minutes. We're having a huge swarm of kids coming in late because the buses were late. I know personally, some of the after school activities, especially like freshman and sophomore year, I like ended up turning down. I think a lot of it was like the opportunity to, receive one-on-one after school help. Sometimes I would decline solely because I know that next bus isn't going to come and I'm too tired at the end of the day to deal with that long walk. The times that school starts and ends aren't new, right? It's been this way for I don't know however long they've even been functioning, so it's not a surprise or anything. And this would just be a communication between Baltimore City and the MTA bus services. Like, hey, we're going to have roughly 100 kids coming from this area, going to this area at about 6 o'clock. We're going to need transportation, and it has to be provided by y'all. Just provide the transportation or routes to the public transportation. That's something that can be easily fixed and should have been a long time ago, if not already.
Right. So students told us a lot about their experiences, and they also gave us a lot of recommendations. And so just to give a quick update on a couple of those areas, one of the student recommendations obviously was to see more buses more frequently. There hasn't been much change in terms of the frequency of buses, obviously. In addition, they wanted to see an improvement in terms of the transit app. And just the consistency of the information that they were getting from the transit app. Unfortunately, that's not the case. On some instances, students have told us that the transit app is less consistent, and worst of all, they now have a Transit Royale premium function. So in order to see all of the routes that you would typically see, you got to pay $5 a month just to see those routes, and you get to have new features like unlimited transit schedule, so you can see your schedule for next week, even though the schedule probably won't be correct because they won't come on time. And you get celebrity status, and you get a emoji with your nickname. I don't know what that's worth, but not too many important improvements as far as the transit app. As far as leniency with the one cards, your students still have to have the one card present, so not much in terms of that. We recommended that there be a partnership to create sort of a kids ride free program like there is in DC. Not much moving on that. As Lee mentioned, there has been some legislation to push for the one card to be integrated with TronPass. So that is one good thing.
Thanks, Kwane. And these are a couple of our other recommendations. One bucket is on safety and one is on communication and accountability. So one of the big student recommendations was that they really would just like more shelters and better lighting around bus stops, just sort of those infrastructural changes to make them feel a little bit safer when they're waiting and walking. And we also recommended a joint initiative to combat a lot of the sexual harassment that young women told us they're experiencing day to day on and around transit. I will say that the MTA started the first phase of this in September. They haven't been totally transparent with us in terms of where they are going forward, but you will see some of these posters at bus stops on like, what is sexual harassment? I believe they're going to be training operators and providing some more awareness to riders. But to be honest, we're not sure what the next phases will look like or what that timeline is. But we are happy to see that it's launched. In terms of communication and accountability, we originally recommended that there be seats for students on the MTA Citizens Advisory Committee, but there's a lot of challenges. There's an age limit. Those meetings don't happen at times when students can make them. So we recommended a youth advisory, specifically for youth to be able to share their concerns, a dedicated space for them. And to be honest, we've been working since the release of this to uplift that and develop it. It's still in the works. Things have gotten derailed and paused. I believe they will develop one. I think they They really want to make sure that it speaks to the needs of the students and that they have the capacity to run it. So there's a couple of things they're balancing. But in terms of communication and accountability, that's where we are with the committee. We did recommend just some awareness campaigns for city schools and school-based staff to just understand what their students are going through getting to and from school, and also to launch like a Know Your Ride campaign, helping students and families consider their commute and just what that impacts them in terms of school choice. And I'll invite Lee to share a little bit more about how you can get involved.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Yeah, if any of you are interested in learning more about the Baltimoreans for Educational Equity, right now we're meeting monthly. Feel free to reach out to the email that's listed below to find out more on how you can get involved. We're taking some time right now to figure out what kind of our next steps are as we continue to focus on transit equity and teacher retention. But yeah, that's kind of as simple as that. If you'd like to learn more and get involved, just reach out to us, and we look forward to hearing from you. And I think that's our last slide, so happy to open it up for any questions.
Great. I would like to say thank you all so much, not only for your hard work, which is so important to shine a light on this issue, but I also have to say that the videos were really powerful. Just to hear firsthand from students what they have to deal with day to day was extremely impactful. Also want to thank you for coming up with solutions, right? I mean, we know that there are always issues with respect to public transportation, and we can talk about those, but the fact that you've actually come up with some very viable and feasible alternatives, I think is extremely important. As always, Transit Choices supports your efforts, and let us know what we can do to continue advocating on your behalf, as we do for all issues pertaining to public transit. With that said, I'd like to open the floor to questions, comments, and you may either raise your hand or you may put a comment in the chat. Jimmy, would you like to make a comment? Jimmy?
Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry. I'm so glad you put those videos together and are presenting this. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure the MTA is aware of it and work with them to try to take into account your all suggestions, which I think are very viable, as Robin was saying. But it's great work you are doing, and I want to congratulate you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments for our first presenters?
I just wanted to chime in and just thank you all for this work as well. I went to Baltimore City Schools some years ago, and I faced a lot of these same issues that these students are facing today. And it's very unfortunate that they still have to deal with this. But it's great work, and I'll definitely be reaching out to get involved.
Thank you.
That's excellent. Before we move on, I would like to share with everyone that we will be sending the recording of this meeting today, as well as the presentations that you will be seeing, and as well as contact information. So if you have any follow-up or anything else that you would like to ask or share, we will make that available. Thank you again, Ruth, Kwane, and Lee, for your time. We know you're busy, so we appreciate it.
Thank you, Robin.
Our next presenter is Delegate Mark Edelson. Mark is with us. Mark, I've made you a co-host. Mark represents the 46th district. He has been a very, very busy new delegate with respect to the legislative session as it relates to transportation, and we're so proud of his success to date. His presentation today is titled The Maryland General Assembly 2023 Session Around Transit Update. Mark, welcome.
Thanks, Robin. Hi, everybody. Great to see you all again. I was just thinking a couple minutes ago, I was at a community meeting last night in Locust Point, which was a great and lively conversation. And we were getting questions about Family Medical Leave Act and concealed carry permits and all kinds of issues in the legislative session. But I have to say, it also makes me very happy to be back in this room this morning amongst fellow transit advocates. So it's great to see you all. What I'm going to do is give a brief sort of top to bottom look at how this session went for me personally, and then from a larger scale for the state of Maryland, for the city of Baltimore. And I'll try to focus it on transportation issues. And then if we have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. So as Robin mentioned, this was my first session in the General Assembly. It was an absolutely amazing experience. It was a 90-day whirlwind to every stretch of the imagination. We heard about 3,000 bills over the 90-day period and passed around 800 of them. So it's an incredible amount of work that we get through in a short period of time. Having been sworn in, I was appointed to the House Appropriations Committee, which is the committee that really deals with the budget in the House. And so my main focus was really in learning and understanding how our incredibly complex state budget works, both from an operating and a capital perspective, and then making sure that I do everything that I can to bring home as much of the bacon as I can to Baltimore City, to the 46th district, and for me personally, for transportation and transit projects. So some high level investments that we made this session. We put aside $900 million in a fund for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is our education, complete public education overhaul, which is probably the biggest investment that we will be making in the future of Maryland. And so I was proud to be part of setting aside that huge down payment on our future. We made huge investments in mental and behavioral health, in affordable housing and neighborhood redevelopment, in rebuilding state government, which unfortunately has been absolutely decimated under the prior governor. Our current vacancy rates in our state government are higher than they've ever been. And so a big focus of the Moore administration and of the House and of the Senate is really in focusing on rebuilding our state government, which is a massive thing that we focus on, particularly in the House Appropriations Committee, because one of the ways we have to rebuild our state government is by finding ways to pay people. And that comes out of appropriations. We also stabilized our earned income tax credit and made them permanent, and the child tax credit, which are two of our biggest tools to alleviate poverty, homelessness, and in particular child poverty. And for Baltimore City in particular, we were able to bring home a little over $100 million in both operating and capital funds, some for major projects around the city like school rebuilding and the convention center and our inner harbor, and then a whole bunch of money for local projects, parks, green spaces, things that will help to revitalize our communities. Within the Appropriations Committee, I was appointed to two subcommittees. I was appointed to the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee and the Personnel Oversight Subcommittee. So for me, anybody who knows me going into this position, that was really a dream assignment to be both on the Appropriations Committee and then on the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee, which is chaired by Mark Corman, who is the majority leader in the House and also happens to be a law school classmate of mine back at the University of Maryland in 2010. And so that was a great experience for me as well. Specifically on the transportation piece, I'd say one of the biggest things we did was to dedicate up to $200 million into a fund for transportation projects, things like the Red Line, things like the SMART project in Southern Maryland. You know, you want to think big picture transportation projects is what that $200 million is a down payment for. We also passed a bill that now former Delegate Tony Bridges, who recently took a job at the Maryland Department of Transportation, sponsored, which was HB 794, which is to initiate a regional transit commission, which will study, review, and make recommendations regarding specifically transit in our greater Baltimore region, and then on the plans of MTA and how they plan to increase ridership and improve reliability. Another big bill we passed was a TOD, Transportation Operating Development Capital Grant Program. This is a grant and revolving loan fund that was passed by Delegate Jazz Lewis. That was really meant to kind of energize our TOD process in the state and add a realm of equity to decisions that we make when giving TOD priority to certain areas and certain projects. We also brought home millions in state investments. I think it was about 12 million total for Penn Station and the new Frederick Douglass Tunnel, which was seen in President Biden's launch announcement video for his campaign for re-election, which is obviously very exciting to see both Baltimore and transit focused so heavily in that video. So that's going to be extremely exciting, the development both at Penn Station and then with the redevelopment of Penn Station, and then also the new Frederick Douglass Tunnel. Getting down to some big ones, for me, the most important one that was actually signed by our governor early this week is the Fair Fares Act. This is HB 673. And what this does is that it uncouples MTA fares from inflation. Back in 2013, we passed a law that tied both gas taxes to inflation and our MTA fares to inflation. And what it noted is that if inflation continues to rise over a series of years, our MTA fares would have to rise, mandated by law, consistent with it. And that just seemed to me antithetical to the kinds of equity decisions that we want to be making with how we move people around our city, our region, and our state. And that law would have impacted most directly folks that need transit the most, that need the bus, they don't have another option, they cannot afford a vehicle. And this is a real budget crusher for these families that need transit to get to work, to the grocery store, to green spaces. And so what we were able to do was pass this bill that both uncouples MTA fares from inflation and also gives MTA the authority to set the fares for its own transit system, which makes sense to me. And I just want to give a big shout out to MDOT Secretary Paul Wiedefeld and MTA Administrator Holly Arnold, who were really instrumental in making that happen. And then all of the advocates and stakeholders, many of whom are in this room, thank you to you. At one point in time, about halfway through session, this was really the big bill that I was focusing on. And I was told by an unnamed high-ranking member in the House that this bill was not going to pass this session, that this was a big deal and it was going to take a couple of years to get it through, and trying to get it passed this session was just too much to do at once, and that we were probably a few years out from passing this bill. Well, fast forward to about 45 days later, and the governor is signing the bill into law. So, if anything, to me, that was just a reminder of the importance of the advocacy that we all do, and the notion of just never giving up, because it was a huge success that we all achieved together. Another big one for me, and this is part of the learning process as well, is that not everything that we want to accomplish in the General Assembly has to be done via legislation. There are many other levers that we have that we can pull, particularly, frankly, in the Appropriations Committee, to make state agencies, frankly, do what we want them to do to be moving Maryland in a positive direction. And one of those things is adding language to the budget that essentially fences off funding for an agency until they do something that we are asking them to do. So one of those that I was able to add to the budget is language requiring a report from MDOT on the idea of flexing or transferring federal formula dollars from highway projects to transit projects. And so the idea here is every year we get a certain amount of money from the federal government in formulaic ways that is non-discretionary that we can sort of use for particular projects. And for a long time, particularly the last 8 years, the previous administration would put most of that money into highway projects, into road widening, into all the things that we know that do not actually move people more effectively around the state. But what we can be doing, if we want to be more creative and innovative with that money, is that we can actually, what's known as flexing it or transferring it into transit projects. And so one of the things that we are going to require MDOT to do is provide a report to us on exactly how that mechanism would work, exactly which sets of funds could be transferred to transit projects, how we would go about doing that, and whether or not they've done it before, because the idea here is to have a complete cultural shift in how our transportation business units, frankly, and our state government view single occupant vehicle traffic as the priority, switching that culture to viewing transit and public transportation as the priority. So There are programs like the Surface Transportation Block Grant, the National Highway Performance Program, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. All of these are massive chunks of federal funds that we get that we could be transferring into transit projects. Sorry about that. Another one that we passed that was a huge one is SB 24, which is particularly exciting among transit nerds like myself, which does two things. One is that it adds a $1 billion increase in the amount of MDOT's bonding authority for projects that they will then back with future federal formula aid to repay the debt service. So the idea there is, we get money, as I said, from the federal government every year, and we typically put that money into current projects that are happening at that time. What we can do using this mechanism called the Garvey mechanism is that we can essentially increase our bonding authority that MDOT can tap into and pay back the future debt service with the money that we know we're going to get from the federal government each year. And when you do that, you sort of have to say at the time, these are the set projects that these increased bond revenues can go to. And so we passed this bill that includes projects like the Red Line, that includes projects like SMART down in Southern Maryland, that includes potentially expanding rail into Western Maryland. Some more of these big picture projects that we want MDOT to be thinking about and working on, and this will give them significantly more bonding authority to make big picture investments, knowing that the certain federal money that we're going to get each year, we can use to repay the debt service. The second big piece of this bill that came back to the House from the Senate is the creation of the Maryland Commission on Transportation Revenue and Infrastructure Needs. This is a very exciting sort of blue ribbon commission with the highest level membership in the House, the Senate, the MDOT secretary, the budget secretary, appointments made by the governor to focus really on our long-term transportation infrastructure repairs, maintenance, state of good repair, and planning in the state from the revenue standpoint. And the reason is because all of our transportation projects in the state, whether it's bridges, highways, or transit plans, almost all come out of the Transportation Trust Fund. This is a central pot of money that gas taxes and a couple other sources of funds go into. That is the central location that our transportation projects are funded out of. And as we move more people, as we want to be doing, to driving electric vehicles, what that does mean is that less people are paying gas taxes. And so the gas tax revenues that we rely on to fund all of these projects continue to go down. So what we need to be thinking about is, how do we change the model for how we bring money and revenue into the Transportation Trust Fund to fund all of these projects that make such a big difference to all of our counties around the state? And so this commission is going to really tackle those issues. So it's going to look at things like revenue trends that demonstrate weaknesses in the stability of the trust fund, trends in operating and capital expenditures and how resources have constrained our programming, trends in the general fund and general obligation support for state transportation expenditures, whether revenue funds for transit and roads, bridges, and tunnels should be segregated into a separate fund, the methods that other states are employing to fund transportation projects operating in capital, whether it's toll revenue, vehicle miles traveled fees, fees on zero emission vehicles, non-transportation related revenue options, all of these sort of big picture questions that we need to be tackling to think about the next 10, 20, 50 years of transportation funding for the state of Maryland. So, this will really be sort of the epicenter of those discussions regarding transportation infrastructure in our state. It's a very exciting step that we're going to be taking. It's probably going to result in some difficult political decisions that we're going to need to be making in the next few years, I think, to try to find new revenue sources and think about how we fund some of these major, both very expensive but absolutely critical projects for the state of Maryland. And so, it was very exciting to me that we sort of got that passed in the first session of a new term with a new governor, a new attorney general, a new comptroller, all of these major positions that are in a decision-making authority for our state, that will now have this report that'll come out of this commission to really focus on how we move transit forward in the state of Maryland. And so That was a very exciting one. I'm going to do my best to get myself onto the commission. So stay tuned on that, because there are 3 appointments that will be General Assembly members, specifically in the House. And frankly, I think we need somebody that represents the city of Baltimore, somebody in the House, somebody who's on the Appropriations Committee, and somebody whose focus is transportation and transit. And I have to say, with Delegate Bridges having left the House, I'm sort of the only person that checks that box right now. So hopefully I'll be able to get on this commission and make sure that we're advocating for our priorities and our values. So that's sort of a high level look at what happened this session, Robin. Hopefully that gives a good sort of picture and understanding. And if there's time, I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Absolutely excellent conversation regarding legislation as it relates to public transit. And, we want to reiterate how incredibly grateful we are to you. I mean, we know that you have a very challenging full-time job. So the fact that you spend all of this time really focusing on your other passion, which is improving public transit, for both Baltimore and beyond, is really commendable. I will open the floor to questions and comments. I did have one for you, which is Transit Choices has been getting emails just sort of pertaining to the Baltimore Regional, BRTA, Baltimore Regional Transportation Authority. And can you speak in any greater detail about that in terms of the status of the bills, and then really, and more importantly, the next steps?
Sure. So there were 2 sort of companion bills that moved through the House and the Senate on that subject. The one was to set up a regional transit commission. That was one of Tony Bridges' bills. That was, let me just make sure I have it. Yeah, that was HB 794.
Right.
And so that one is the focus there is to work with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council and look at how we, how our MTA budget works, how we focus on the projects that we fund, how we think about service in the region, and sort of work hand in hand collectively in a helpful and collaborative way with MTA specifically to advocate for our region. The second bill was to set up a study that would have studied a regional transportation authority. And this would be a sort of drastic shift from how we currently do transportation in the region currently. This would be a totally separate authority that potentially would have authority over MTA itself, that would have its own revenue sources, that would have the ability to raise taxes if necessary for certain projects. And so that would be sort of a sea change for how we do transportation in the region. That particular bill was for a study. And so the idea was, on one hand, we need to set up this commission right now that will give a ability to really look into and work with MTA to think about how we do transit and transportation projects in the region. The much bigger one, frankly, was the study to look at a completely new regional transportation authority. Unfortunately, the bill to set up the study did not pass. And so we kind of have one of the bills pass and the other one did not. And so, we have a situation where we will have the commission, and the commission will obviously be able to do all of its enumerated functions. But at this time, we're not going to have a study to look at a completely drastic change to how we do sort of transportation planning in the region. And obviously that authority would then have its own governing structure. And the ultimate notion would be, if we look back at what happened with the Red Line, right? Currently, the way the system is set up, the governor and the MDOT secretary basically have all the power, for better or worse. And then the different transportation business units under MDOT basically take their direction from the MDOT secretary, who takes his or her direction from the governor. The idea of an authority would be to change that governing structure, to do it how, frankly, many other regions around the country do their transportation planning, where the local region has a lot more of its own power and authority to make decisions, and it's not so one-sided. The other side of that coin is that typically then those local regions contribute a significant amount of money to those transportation projects, typically via taxes. And so what this study would have been set up to look at is how would that work for our region? Would it make sense for us? Would it not? And so unfortunately that didn't pass. Someone's probably going to bring it up next session. Like I said, it was Delegate Bridges' bill this session, and he's not going to be in the House next session. So my guess is somebody else will bring it up and we'll kind of re-engage that conversation. And it's possible that when we do, we'll have some data from how the commission is doing to be able to say, okay, this is functioning, but it needs more power and authority, or things are functioning fine, whatever it might be. So that's it was a little bit frustrating, candidly, because these two bills are really meant to be companion bills. To have one pass and the other not, feels like we lost a little bit of momentum there. But that being said, one of the items that the SB 24 Commission, which is a statewide commission, one of its charges is to study regional transportation authorities. And so while that might not be focused specifically on our region, it is one of the items that commission will be looking at. And I think if we can get the right people on that commission, we can make sure that part of that discussion is what would an authority look like in the greater Baltimore region.
Thank you for that, explanation and clarification. And you actually answered my last question, which was with Tony Bridges now at, MDOT. Just wondering who's gonna sort of carry that, further. But to be continued, and please keep us updated as any new information becomes available.
Robin,
Thank
can I
you.
say one thing?
Oh, sure. By the way, I'm opening the floor now to.
I
all
know we're
questions.
running out of time, but I just want to say how exciting it is, Mark, to have you in the position you are in. The issues around transportation funding are so complex that the average layman like myself cannot possibly wrap our arms around it. And by having you in that position, you can make our advocacy so much more effective, translating to us what needs to happen. And it's just, and to also have your leadership, it's just great. And so I really look forward to working with you. And I'm really appreciative of your efforts to get into that job. And we're backing you 100%.
Thanks, Jimmy. Well, I would not have been able to get into this job in the first place if it wasn't for your support. So I'm immensely appreciative of you as well. And I will just say, it is a very challenging and complex subject matter to understand, but it's made significantly easier by the unbelievably dedicated and talented staff at the Department of Legislative Services. I mean, it is an incredible state bureaucracy of dedicated professionals that help make our lives as legislators so much easier and explain these subjects to me in a way that I can understand. And so I will just note that our state government from the standpoint of legislative services runs incredibly well. And that's been probably one of the most exciting sort of surprises for me, that I didn't realize just how broad that level of support is for our legislators.
Thanks, Mark. That makes me feel better because some of these things are very, very complicated and complex. Klaus, did you have a question? Or
yeah,
comment?
I just wanted to ask Mark, with all the new insights about funding and the bond mechanism that you described and all that, what you would think the very next steps should be to get the red line really back on the books, and the key challenge seems to be, how we get the money in. There would be the state portion, the local portion, the federal portion. And then there's the issue of the EIS and the right of way, and whether any of the past engineering and environmental studies can be grandfathered and be put back into place. And I have no good sense as to what the administration is really doing about this. And I know you are not in session now, but I still wondered whether you had any kind of particular insights or tips on what should be done and what we activists should be pursuing as avenues.
Yeah, I love that question, Klaus. Well, I'll say this: hope springs eternal on the Baltimore Red Line.
Yeah, well.
There's good reason to be optimistic about it right now. While we're not in session, I can tell you that I am having multiple conversations every day with folks in all levels of government about the red line. And so there is a lot, it might not be necessarily visible to the public right now, but there is a lot of energy and discussion and focus on reviving the red line. And it's not just lip service, it is real. Obviously, there are a lot of complicated issues that we're going to have to work through. It's a massive project. It was like that the first time around. But all of those issues are solvable. And it really feels to me, I have to say, like we have the right people in place who want to solve those challenges to get it back online. Yes, there are going to be questions about what's the mode going to be, what's the alignment going to be, tunneling, no tunneling, all of that, the same questions we had the first time around. Where does the money come from? How do we put the package together? How do we get the public support and deal with the areas of the public that might not be so supportive? Although I would argue that a lot of those areas have changed a lot in the last 7-8 years, that we'll be surprised by the levels of support in certain parts of the city. But I'll just tell you that there is a lot of discussion and energy around it right now. And a lot of people who have really made it their priority and people who are in decision-making positions to make it their priority. In terms of the environmental study, I think the focus will be on maintaining as much of the prior plans as possible so that it's really just a supplemental study from the prior one. That will obviously be a much shorter period of time to ideally get to a record of decision and start moving forward on it. Which means obviously that our discussions around potential alignment and mode will be somewhat constrained, but maybe that's a good thing because there are a lot of different ways to skin this cat. And I think if we have too many options on the table, that can result in a little bit of decision paralysis, which we don't want to do. So I would say from the advocate standpoint, I would keep pushing and pulling on any levers that you have with elected officials, decision makers. Feel free to be hitting me up on it as much as you want. I can tell you that while it's not session, it is a very, very active and current discussion. It's not the kind of thing where people are saying, let's wait till the next session and see what happens. There's a lot happening in the interim, which is very exciting. And I would say try to have this is probably a difficult thing to do, but some level of, sort of cautious optimism, a bit of patience in knowing that things are really happening, but let's not take our foot off the gas for 1 second because we need to make sure that everybody in a decision-making position knows how important this is, not just to Baltimore, but to the region.
If I could maybe
Thank
add
you.
one comment from what you just said, what I learned that I guess the messaging is key for advocates as well as for politicians and the administration, which is to not open all the same debates again, because that was the weakness we had in the first place. And that the chances to get the EIS to just be a supplemental new one is only there if we don't touch all these big questions again. And so I think it is on us to really message that the red line has been analyzed and investigated to death in the first round, and that this is the time where all the people need to sing from the same page. And if that's not going to happen, and if we are falling into all these fractions and factions again, we are not going to get this project done.
I couldn't agree more, and candidly, that's what I've been saying as well in every conversation I've been having, whether it's with a transportation planning engineer or an elected official or a decision maker in state government. At the end of the day, we're going to have to coalesce behind the plan and have sort of a unified advocacy piece, for us all. Yeah, we can debate it a million ways from Sunday, but as you put, that really has been done. And so at this point, we need to get something happening, because what we've seen is great can easily be the evil of good here, or perfect the evil of great, I guess is a better way to say it. And having a plan that's actually happening is way better than having the nothingness that we've had since the decision was made. So, but I will say there is real reason to be hopeful and optimistic outside of my usual perpetual optimism.
Thank you. We will have to move on, but of course we can continue any comments, questions, or feedback in the chat messages. It is now my pleasure to introduce Laura. Is it Emily? Am I pronouncing that correctly, Laura?
Emily.
Yes, Emily. Good morning and
Good
welcome.
morning.
It's a pleasure to have you join us today. Laura, is going to speak with us about the Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel, a perspective from ground zero. So Laura, the floor is yours.
All righty, let me share my screen and open this up. Okay, thank you so much for having us. Whoa.
Yeah, we're not seeing your screen just yet.
Okay. I did hit share screen. Am I a host?
You are?
All right, let me try it again. Share screen.
Yep, you are definitely a co-host.
Okay.
Oh, I think yes. Success.
All right. Okay, slideshow from beginning. Okay, as we said, thank you so much for having us first off, and I'll go as quickly as I can. I'm Laura Amley, here to explain why we are residents against these tunnels. But first, let me tell you what we are for. We are for great passenger trains. Some of us are MARC commuters. We are for needed freight rail and the Port of Baltimore. We are for infrastructure improvements. We also highly value stable communities, human safety, people's homes, historic architecture, Baltimore's livability and future, environmental and social justice, and responsible, effective use of public funds. This project falls short on several of those concerns. We're saying, whoa, slow down this runaway train. Revise the plan with citizen welfare as a higher priority. I'll present our objections from several perspectives. So I'm gonna race through, and we ask, whom does this help? Whom does it hurt? And is there a better balance? Amtrak really does need a solution to the Baltimore bottleneck, the limitations on passing or rerouting when there's a problem. I'll address their speed concerns later. This is their solution, the Great Northern Circle, which the railroads have wanted for 50 years. And I believe their study was geared for it to be the only answer. The forbidden F word. Freight and Amtrak are inseparably linked on the record of decision. It is one plan and one approval. The word freight is used 46 times in the needs assessment, driving the specs so that only routes with room for 4 massive double-stacked tubes were even considered. Their own study shows that the community will object to increased freight, but rather than change the plan, they launched a PR war, pushing only Amtrak out front while hiding behind it, riding its popularity and funding, practically denying freight. Also on the PR front, think big picture. They use all the same old rhetoric to shove it through as every project ever proposed, including some projects wisely canceled and others that probably should have been. Urgent, progress, necessary, the future, jobs, the only way, this or nothing, community investment. It all should sound familiar. Rail freight in the news. As you know, in just 3 months, freight trains have derailed in Illinois, Montana, Minnesota with an ethanol explosion, Texas, California, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, North Dakota, and of course, Palestine, Ohio. Every time the news, there's a call for better safety, and the railroads sing their commitment loud and clear. However, meanwhile, their lobbyists fight against regulations and contribute money to key politicians who will work with them. They even state that safety measures are too expensive, while their record-breaking profits in 2022 were plowed back into stock and investor dividends. Oh, excuse me. Rail freight, they're also fighting to block Amtrak and grab the rail infrastructure money. We're not even allowed to know what explosive or toxic materials are coming by our homes or when. These concerns are nationwide. CBS did a national piece about hazardous freight just this week. Multiple studies have called for rerouting hazardous freight around cities and populous areas. Progressive cities are moving it out. For Baltimore, the pleas, recommendations, and viable alternative routes have been pitched for decades, but killed mostly by the rail companies with lack of funding as a prime reason. The view from ground zero, our thought is, look, this is a once-in-a-lifetime infrastructure investment. It's the chance to act on those studies and do it right by rerouting freight around Baltimore in the industrial zones. It also means that they have dedicated lines that they don't have to share with Amtrak, which they are so annoyed by. Why not help solve a big concern rather than squander $6 billion on bringing more dangerous freight through the city? How does that make sense? The next perspective is that of Amtrak. Amtrak needs a solution, but the approved plan brings other problems. The Howard Street Tunnel, but things have changed. The Howard Street Tunnel enlargement is underway. It should both meet freight's needs and diminish the demands that built the spec list. Uncouple it from Amtrak in the ROD. Amtrak PR makes great claims about increased speed and time savings, but the PR doesn't match the facts. The claim significantly improving speed. The fact Amtrak already goes over 100 miles an hour on the stretches. And while the new tunnels might be built for 100 miles per hour, that speed is not allowed by law. Plus the trains spend most of the tunnel slowing down to stop at Penn Station. Pushed to the wall, the reps will admit that the time savings are mostly from changes outside of the tunnels. The actual average time savings for the tunnels is 152 seconds, and the cost is now up to $6 billion. The selected route for Amtrak doesn't even meet their own criteria. There are other options, including looking at their own alternative number 2, redesigning the existing route. The view from ground zero, a diminished freight factor, criteria flaws, and unexplored options all justify finding new choices. Also, a time savings of 152 seconds for $6 billion. Is that a valid return on investment? Our next perspective is construction. Even if there's no freight, almost a decade of tunnel construction brings its own dangers and miseries. 2 construction cities with trailer cement plants, sludge ponds, and thousands of dump truck loads will invade Edelson and Reservoir Hill with noise, traffic, soot, dust, and chemicals. The jackhammer or pile driver that makes people crazy after an hour, imagine it for 6 years. Here's the 4-block long little city at Edmondson site with dump truck routes winding through these tiny streets right next to these little houses. The 9-house long sludge pond and muck bin goes on that far corner right next to houses and across from the playground on the corner closer to us. The egress tunnel, in Reservoir Hill will require explosives under about 800 feet of houses. The yellow mark there is these fragile houses in the Reservoir Hill Historic District. In fact, the project impacts hundreds of homes, including 4 historic districts of the houses that define Baltimore. These fragile antiques don't have the foundations, framing, mortar, or flexibility of modern buildings. They shake and crack when buses go by. This facade fell off from BG&E roadwork, and many reported cracked plaster and broken gas lines. This house partially collapsed from storm damage and the vibration from I-83. To us, this clearly means they cannot withstand the violence and vibration of such heavy construction, especially from these massive tunnel boring machines as they grind, shake, and hollow the earth. As the vibration expert told us, oh no, you do not want to be in your home when that's going through. The TBMs have caused damage and loss of life. Backers dismiss any accidents as the exceptions that prove the rule. The PR touts the safety of the TBMs, but their own documents say it's unpredictable. In other words, they don't know. They can't know. But they're fine to bring this under us without even doing the testing that they do have available. A full vibration study was not done. Several thousand people live in the affected zone. The dots here represent those places that will be affected by the running of the trains once the construction's done. The agony doesn't stop. we have virtually no protection, and it even puts our future insurance at risk. We've been pursuing a study ourselves for years, and we're grateful and excited to have been accepted by this international group. Fingers crossed they can find us somebody. Please take the QR code and pass it on if you know any engineers who would be willing to do this study. Nobody nearby is, because they all want a piece of the money pie that is coming with this project. Our view from ground zero on this: we deserve full and specific stability studies for the architecture. The other ill effects of this 10-year invasion on community stability and health are big concerns in the next section, which is environmental justice. Every community that their solution runs through raises environmental justice concerns. I'm doing an injustice to it by skimming it here, as the effects are so deep, injurious, pervasive, and long-lasting that it deserves its own one-hour presentation. The backers are touting the winners and pretending there are no losers, that no one's getting hurt. There are people who will lose big, some irretrievably, and it's the usual people who get run over, the very people for whom environmental justice laws were created. A large percentage of the residents in the affected areas are underprivileged, low-income people of color. Ironically, equity and sustainability are part of the mission of the infrastructure bill. Many of us are fans of those elected officials who see the importance of this infrastructure. The Environmental Law Clinic at University of Maryland helped us craft an advocacy letter to them in the hopes that we can be seen and heard by them as well. And it seems we're not alone in this boat. It seems to be happening in a bunch of places. So please, Mr. Buttigieg, please turn your environmental justice concerns this way. And Governor Moore, please hear us. Don't leave us behind. The view from ground zero: we are concerned about environmental justice. Tenants who may be in buildings that are already weakened, homeowners whose blood, sweat, and in their homes they plan to leave as a legacy to children, as a leg up on generational wealth. Students whose educations are compromised by the distraction of noise of pile drivers and trucks outside. Residents along the existing tunnel: will it be abandoned? Will it be improved? How will it affect them? Children and others with the safety concerns of cities, construction cities and dump trucks. The effects of noise, pollution, and stress on all community members. Residents who will have difficulty just getting around detours to bus stops, getting to work, or parking their home. Emergency vehicles not being able to get through. We are concerned and afraid and angry that our elected officials aren't. We also are surprised by how little many of them know. It's simply not right or just to place such a burden on West Baltimore residents so that others can glide blissfully under them. There are options, and they should be checked. It's not too late. Most of the current work that is being done needs to be done anyway. Tunneling doesn't start until 2026. Projects can be stopped. We're feeling railroaded, hostages to the situation, and in danger. We want to be heard. We want to be valued and our concerns respected. We want for the tunnel folks to go back to the drawing board and check other options that prioritize citizens over corporate pull. We want a new EIS with full studies, including vibration, architectural, and engineering stability. We want transparency and public honesty. We're being gaslighted. We'd love to be at the table with the deciders. And we'd like a serious reconsideration of what $6 billion could do for other projects. Thank you. I don't know if we have any time for questions.
We certainly do. So thank you so much, Laura. If you could just stop screen sharing, that would be great.
Indeed.
Perfect. Klaus, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. So obviously, when one gets complicated topic like this, with so many points raised, then there needs to be a longer time to discuss that. And there should be also an expert on the team that really can speak to some of these issues raised. I just mentioned 2 or 3. Some of these concerns are completely legitimate and probably could be resolved without having to redo the entire study from scratch, such as how the spoils get removed and whether they run on trains or whether they run on dump trucks and things of that nature. But there are some fundamental issues raised that seem to be incorrect from the knowledge that I have. I mean, the Amtrak owns the tracks, and on that current Amtrak alignment, there is 1 or 2 freight trains a week, and they are running through there as connecting. There are not big through trains that go across half the country. There are not these 2-mile long freight trains that are in these derailment examples, so that they don't even have hazardous load on it. So the whole emphasis on freight seems to be misguided. There is no intention that I can decipher anywhere that there would be a massive amount of freight all of a sudden moving on this Amtrak alignment. That's not the purpose of this. And then tunnel boring machines, they are used all over the world to build subways and train tunnels, and they are often going right in dense urban environments with old houses on top. That was the same argument that was used against the Red Line Tunnel. That has been done so often in so many cities that without the houses falling down, that I would say that this whole concern that there is jackhammering and that there is piles driven and so on, that all doesn't happen when you have a tunnel boring machine. So in short, I can't do this justice now, and I'm not the real expert on this. And so I just think we should have another session where an expert is invited, or several experts, on vibration, on construction management during construction, all of those things, and that then we go through these allegations point by point, so that the concerns, we all want environmental justice and want not impose unduly on residential communities that we want to thrive, obviously, but we also want a high-speed train network on the East Corridor, and we can't. The main concern isn't the speed. The main concern is that the safety of the current tunnel is not given anymore, and it is just irresponsible to run these trains through the current tunnel much longer. So therefore, the time is of the essence. So that's just a very brief response.
Okay, I will tell you that you can stand on the North Avenue Bridge and watch. I realize that this tunnel is Norfolk Southern, and they do not tend to carry, they tend to carry only lumber and construction things. But you can stand on the North Avenue Tunnel and watch the toxic and flammable trains go by. They're labeled. In fact, when we had the derailment in 2019, while the train was hanging off, other trains were going by on the rail with toxic freight. It is an issue. You can remember the crash of 2001 and some others.
Yeah, that's the Howard Street Tunnel.
I understand. CSX has made it clear that they want rights to go through this tunnel. This has changed. The Howard Street Tunnel has come online since then because they got so much pushback on their big, has to be this huge plan. Finally sent engineers in and said, we could scrape a little here, scrape a little there. When they stopped having it run by the people who would make the profit and had actual engineers look. So there are a lot of things. You can find damage, records of damage from tunnel boring machines in many places. As I said, people dismiss it as the exception that proves the rule. Well, if that's your house, it's the exception, you probably care a lot. But I would love to continue, and you're right, we should have some experts. It's also the false dichotomy of it's this or nothing. It's this old dangerous tunnel or this massive overkill project for Amtrak. There are other solutions. They were never looked at because freight set the specs. But yeah, I'd love to bring some experts in and do it. Take a look.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, we will definitely explore bringing you back, and having a more expanded conversation to give this, this issue the time and attention, that it deserves. So we so appreciate you being with us today. And to all of you, we know that the meeting is run over. We do strive to really end on time, but with 3 presentations, which we felt were really important and valuable, we decided to proceed with our agenda. With that said, please stay tuned for information regarding our next meeting. But we thank each of you so much for your time and for your ongoing support. We really appreciate it. With that, also want to give a shout out to all of our presentations and presenters who did an excellent job. So we're appreciative of your time and valuable expertise as well. With that said, I wish you all a wonderful day and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.